And I want to welcome us once again to the second annual BESR annual conference. And this portion is really around educators' insights and perspectives. And so I'm excited of those who are in the room, but I'm also excited about those who are serving as our esteemed panelists today. Steve, you can switch our slide for us, please. And so I have the pleasure and privilege of serving as today's moderator. And so in your conference packets, I do believe there are bios of all of us, and so I won't read through my information because today is not about me. Today is about all of you in the audience and also hearing different perspectives from our panelists. But just to allow you to understand the lens that I bring to this particular work, career-long K-12 urban education leader and teacher. I define urban as school districts that have served predominantly Black and brown students. And I've worked in the 5th largest school district in the country, that is Las Vegas, Nevada, Clark County School District that educates over 320,000 students. I had the opportunity to serve in the School District of Philadelphia, and then most recently in the Seattle Public Schools. And so I bring a unique lens to the conversation, as do our panelists as well. But some of us may be aware that November is National Native American Heritage Month. And so I always like to begin in recognizing the land upon which this building rests. And so some of you may or may not be aware that the land upon which this building rests is the Duwamish land. And so there are over 500 federally recognized tribes in the United States of America. However, the Duwamish is not one of them. And so I want to ground that. So you were here first, and yet you're not federally recognized. And so some of us may be familiar with a Duwamish tribal elder by the name of Chief Seattle. Chief Seattle is attributed with saying, "Those who tell stories rule the world." I'll say that again. Those who tell stories rule the world. And so our time today is really going to be about what are the stories that are being told about us. And when I mean us, I mean Black people in K-12 education. What are the policies and practices that are starting to create narratives and stories about us? And then what are we going to do to either change the narrative or continue the narrative as it's really outlined for us? And so in order to move that forward, I want to begin to set the stage. And so some of you may be able to see this, but I'll read it for us. But this grounds our work in K-12 education. It says, imagine that upon your arrival at an airline ticket counter, you were told that only 65% of the flights to your intended destination actually even arrive. The remainder crash en route. And if you are a child of color or poor, you are required to fly on special, poorly maintained planes, of which only 35% make it. Sounds crazy, right? But this is exactly the deal that as a nation, we are serving up daily to millions of children in thousands of our public schools. And so I want us to hold that in our minds. I would like us to hold that in our hearts as we engage in this conversation around how are we really focusing on systems responsibility. That's our educators panel focus today. But with systems responsibility, we know it's all about individual responsibility as well. How are we as parents, community members, teachers really moving the work forward to say, here's how I'm individually responsible, and here's how I'm holding that collective accountability for our colleagues to move the work forward. Our time today is really going to be wrapped up into three major, I think that's a qualitative phrase there, but three overarching concepts today. We'll have an opportunity to talk about the McCleary decision, but the impetus of this panel stems from major legislation that has been passed over the last year or policies that have been able to move forward. And these policies has major implications. And so we are here because we care about the plight of Black and brown students. And so I need to like a amen, hallelujah for that. So we are here because we care about the plight of Black and brown students. Okay, thank you. Okay, hallelujah, thank you. Okay, I need something there. I need some energy, okay. And so we'll have the opportunity over the next 40 minutes just to hear different perspectives from my colleagues about what are the limitations, like what are the challenges, like what can we do collectively to move this work forward. And so Steve, we can transition on there. And so our panel format for the next 40 minutes or so is really going to be around our 3 core topics: McCleary, the new discipline decisions, and ESSA. But we're going to attempt to create a structure. And then when I posed this to the panel, I said, well, this will most likely be an iterative conversation that will keep a structure first, and then we'll go with where the flow needs to go. But ideally, we'll talk about the so what, so that everyone understands exactly what is this topic if you're not familiar with it. Then we'll hear from our panelists to share what's the so what around it. So why is this important for us as we think about really impacting the lives and impacting the educational experiences of our K through 12 students, specifically our Black and African American students. And then lastly, there'll be a call to action, really around the now what. We would like to say that this is not simply information for information's sake. That's where we start. But then we also want to make sure that we're committing ourselves to do something beyond just having the information. So I will take a little bit of facilitator privilege to say that's the intent behind what we're going to do in structuring our conversation, knowing that we will go wherever the panelists need to go to make sure that you have what you actually need. And so these will be a few of our guiding questions here so that you have those. And so what are some of those implications, limitations, and challenges of some of these key components that we're talking about? How will these decisions either improve and or impact specifically the student achievement of Black and African American students? And then lastly, that call to action. How can you as conference attendees get involved in moving this work forward, supporting the work, challenging the work, engaging with others to move it forward on behalf of our Black and African American students? And so I would like to begin just with money. And so when we talk about the McCleary decision, and for those of you that want a reference of this information, you'll find that on our green resource guide here with initially information from former state superintendent that talks about the impetus of the McCleary decision. And the second page just gives you a short timeline of where we are now after the McCleary decision of July 2018. And so to give you a little bit of framing around it, it's really around money. It's really around how the state is allocating the appropriate amount of money for our school districts. There's federal legislation, there's state legislation, but in Washington it says it is the paramount duty for our state to fully fund education. And so the question then becomes, are we fully funding education? The answers have been absolutely not. And in July 2018, there was additional funding that was provided to the tune of over $2 billion. The consternation with that became, where do we allocate that $2 million? 80% of our funding in school district goes to staffing. And some of us may be familiar with local levies. Each school district across the state, we have over 296 of those, are able to establish their levy caps, meaning we get money from the state, but yet that money isn't substantial enough to keep the operation going. So we have to fund, we have to get additional money through our local levies to make sure that we can keep the lights on, keep the staff in place. There's been some changes and shifts where the state has now said, we've given additional funding, we've created a levy cap. That just simply means we've established that now school districts cannot go over a particular percentage in how they're funding their levies, and now that creates this big void. So what are we going to do? The state has said, we are not going to give you any more money. That's explicitly been stated. So now we're put in this very unique situation. How do we make sure that we provide amply for our students? If we know that there's a cap on what we can do to fundraise, AKA go after levy dollars, and the district is not providing us any more money. So just wanted to give you a little frame for that. And so I'll be able to turn it over to, just wanted to hear from, I'll start with our panelist, Brad Brown, provides just some context around, like, what does that look like, sound like, some implications for you as you think about McCleary and the implications for our work moving forward.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. All right. So when we talk about funding, for instance, let's say you have a middle school of 700 students. Those levy dollars would help support that school instead of having, say, 1.5 person, figure that one out. We're now able to put 2 or 3. No different than high schools, right? And so having the appropriate number of counselors in place to support high schools. And so we have in some what they call college and career success coaches, right? In those places. And this ties directly to the ESSA. The ESSA calls out for 9th grade tracking that requires support in people. That's why this McCleary decision is very important in terms of supporting that. The other thing, for instance, transportation. It's a huge cost. Right now, our superintendents are having conversations about how do we find creative ways to support a lot of our McKinney-Vento kids. So a lot of districts have to take that extra on. They are obligated to go and transport those students. There isn't, quote unquote, some extra fund for that. Security, and I would say most of, for us in terms of ESD, the 35 districts we support, King and Pierce County, a lot of them have what we call SROs, or school security officers. That is supported and paid for out of levy dollars. So again, it goes back to the importance of having those levy dollars there. And then there's the ever-growing conversation around SPED and 504 and meeting students' accommodations as we get deeper and deeper into serving each and every student more and more on a micro level. It requires more and more of those services, and also being able to have, and you'll hear this called out, the more effective person to serve those students. And right now, the way our system is set up, we're still leaning so much on seniority more so than effective.
No, so Brad, thank you for that. So I'm going to turn it over to, at least to hear from a principal perspective. So as we think about, one of the questions that I'm mindful of is, is it about the allocation of funding at the school level? Meaning, do we have enough to do what we need to do as building principals, or do we not have enough? Are the systems not allocating appropriately or equitably? So as Brad pointed out, you have X amount of student groups, and sometimes more money is needed to support certain student groups. However, if we use a weighted staffing formula that says a Meeker Middle School principal, Nash says X amount of students, has X amount of teachers, therefore you're allocated X amount of dollars, while not paying specific attention to the needs of those particular students. And so if you could just talk a little bit about what that's looked like for you over the course of your 4 years in your building, and how that may be impacted by this new McCleary decision.
At the start of my 4th year, every year that I've been in Kent School District, I came from Arizona, and I was assistant principal at Kentwood High School my first year. This is my 4th year as middle school principal at Meeker. Every start of the year, it's been a challenge because the allocation granted from the district hasn't aligned with what, the projection didn't align with what came through my door, who came through my door, the number of students that came through my door. So there was a transition period of 4 to 6 weeks where my school was understaffed, and we had to be creative around what that looked like and how to serve students. This year in particular, we had 37 students in classes. There was 2 or 3 classrooms where I was calling on the radio and moving desks myself, because I walked into classrooms and students were sitting on the floor. And I was like, what are you doing? Why are you on the floor? And my teacher said that the custodian told them we didn't have any more chairs, we didn't have any more tables. I was like, well, get the one out of my office. This is not okay. And that was when it was real. I took pictures and I sent them to my boss. It was like, there's students sitting on the floor, but it was the timing to wait to see how many students every day were going to show up, and students that had withdrawn, students that were currently enrolling. The way that we're set up, that we start before Labor Day, a lot of the time students come after Labor Day, so you're waiting to see if students are really going to show up. But it's doing a disservice. The first 5 days of school at Meeker Middle School is focused on getting to know all of our students. Our motto is every pioneer, our mascot's a pioneer. Every pioneer deserves a champion. So my focus is really just making sure that students feel safe and they have an adult that they connect with. So we don't focus on academics, we don't focus on curriculum. It's really about establishing a culture in each and every classroom for my students to get to know each and every one of their teachers and as well as their peers in the classroom. My second year in Kent School District, I remember I called a student to the office to ask about a situation, and it was February, March, and I asked who witnessed the situation, who sits next to you, and I was astounded to find out that the student didn't know the 3 students that sat next to them, and it was February. So I wanted to figure out how do I make sure that that's not a theme across the campus. So the first 5 days of school are geared towards us getting to know our students, getting to know their teachers. We really looked at some AVID strategies on building culture and community and so students feeling safe. So during that time, it's really crucial. But this year, due to staffing, and I was allocated more staffing 6 weeks into the school year, the relationships and the rapport that my students established in a certain classroom, I now had to change their schedule, switch them around. And it was hard. It was hard. I had a lot of parent phone calls. My students don't do well with change. They establish a relationship with certain teachers, and because of the allocation, I had to make that switch. And it was hard. It was hard to say to students, get on the microphone, and they're asking about why. And it was a good thing because we were over projection, because Meeker were really working to improve the reputation. So students coming and wanting to be at Meeker is a positive thing, so we had to put a positive spin on that. Like, no, students are here because they are hearing about the good things that our staff is doing, but at the same time, I felt a disservice to a lot of my students because we had to transition them. But I talked to them the same way I talked to my daughter, is that we have to make sure that we can navigate this system, and whoever's in front of you, whatever teacher's in front of you, it's important that you get what you need from that situation. When I was in Arizona, my daughter had moved schools right before I moved here, so she had attended 3 high schools during her 4 years of high school, and I was concerned about that, but I also told her that this was going to be good practice for her to go to college and not come home until you finish. Because if you can do this, you can do anything. And so I'm the type of person, I don't really I almost live under a rock. I'm a person that believes in controllable versus non-controllable, and so the 4 walls within my building I can control. The things that happen outside at the state, at the district level, they don't directly impact me until it comes to these type of things. So trying to create the culture that's positive and safe for the students that are in my school, and the spin that I put on things is really important, how I convey messages to my students. Hey, I know this is an unfortunate situation, but you know what? I've hired 17 new staff to make sure that we're meeting the needs of all of you. And so if you're moving from one teacher to another, you're still going to get the same service, the same way that I would want my daughter to have the same service and relationship. And I'm trying to convey that into my staff. So no matter who's in front of my students, it should be the same. It should be the same. And that's the hope. That's the work in progress. Like I said, I had the opportunity to hire lots of new people and a diverse staff this year that really care about students. One of the questions that I asked in interviews was, number 1, do you like kids? And number 2, do you like kids of color? And I just want you to know that if this Meeker Middle School is a real diverse school, there's a couple other schools in our district that aren't as diverse. I'm at Meeker because of the diversity. I chose this school because of the students that are here. My daughter went to the high school that was the most diverse in the school district because I wanted her to be exposed to that. I value and respect diversity, so I've made it very clear to every person I brought on board that this was the primary reason that I was here, and I needed to have a team that aligned with that same vision and philosophy. And I was very direct about that.
And so, Darice, if you can just add a little bit to this, knowing that Matson looks a little bit different, or just talking a little bit about, I think I'm looking at, based on your student numbers right now, how are you making principal leadership decisions that target the needs of the students that are in the building based on, as Shannon pointed out, there may be some concessions that you have to make around, here's what I need to do to make sure that the students in my building are getting what they need, knowing there are finite resources that I have. If you can speak to that a little bit for us.
So the thing that strikes me the most is that in the field of education, we often do the opposite of what's best for students, working within the constraints of the law, with money. And so when you have a staffing formula that does not support the needs of students, it makes it difficult, but it also makes you become more creative on behalf of students. It forces you to think outside of the box. And so for us at Meridian, when we have a high number of special ed students, ELL students, and students of color, you've got almost a two-track kind of system that you have to think about when it comes to staffing your classrooms and working with adults, because you have to help adults deal with the challenges that come, whether academic behavior challenges, and then also trying to create a system that supports students' academics. And so when you have teacher contracts that say they can only have this many students for this many minutes a day, it makes you have to think about, well, that's not what's best for students. I need smaller class sizes as opposed to bigger class sizes, because that's what the numbers, my staffing formula is only going to allow me to have this many staff to this ratio of students. And so when you're running a core math class of 28 students, that's not good practice. And so one of the things we were able to think about, and we're implementing it for the first time, is we had extra money, and so we took a couple of my teachers, and they're doing a push-in, pull-out model for math and for reading. So they're taking half of a class back to their classroom to help teach and reteach the standards that they're not understanding. But having to do that within the staffing that you already have, which means we had to give up something else. And oftentimes that means I had to take something fun. One of the teachers taught an elective. So then I had to take not the elective from the student, but out of my staffing. So now I can only have a semester of leadership, when really students need a whole year of leadership. Or what was AVID, we call it student success. So now there's only a semester of that, because I need that teacher the second semester to teach something, to teach a core. So the impacts of money on the building, it's real, as we all know, but it also forces us to be more creative. And I know Shannon has done some innovative things at her school as well, because we know that our students of color, especially our African American students, learn differently. They're not going to sit in a 55-minute period nicely like we're sitting up here on this panel and you're sitting in the audience. Got to get some things moving and shaking. And so you also have to help teachers understand that. And so at my school, when I first started, I had 4 teachers who'd been there for 30 years. And my staff does not look like me, does not look like my students. And so over the course of the years, now I have 1 left that's been there for 33 years. But having the opportunity like Shannon to hire, and then to have extra money to hire a consultant, an outside consultant, to come in to work on culture, to work on efficacy, and not just efficacy around instruction, but around instructing students of color in particular, and building equity teams, and understanding how students learn. And it's not just about, well, what I do is best for all students. Well, we're different, and we have to acknowledge that.
No, thank you for that. And so one of the things that I wanted to transition our time to is we take a look at our second guiding question there. How will these decisions improve, impact student performance outcomes, especially for our Black and African American students? One of our second core topics that I wanted to talk a little bit about is just the OSPI's new discipline rules. And so one of the documents that you have in front of you is a brief overview. It's the blue sheet that is an introduction. And so to level set that a little bit, There's an opportunity, I think I may be preaching to the choir here, but sometimes you have to explicitly state things that are oftentimes left unsaid. And so if we take a look at the data in 2018, it looks exactly the same as the data in 2008. It looks exactly the same as data in 1998 around the students that are either performing well or underperforming. And when we start to look at behavior discipline, or we start to look at discipline data, we see that there is gross disparity in the students that are being frequently disciplined more than others. And oftentimes we can say, is that a manifestation of just the system itself? Knowing that 80+%, and Brad, can you give me that actual percentage again of our white teachers in this? So 86% of the teachers in Washington State are white. That's not bad, that's not good, that's just a fact. Our students don't look, say that again? 77% of them are women. And so 77% of those 80+% are white women. And so when we start thinking about discipline, I think of the root word, and so I studied etymology back in the day, so I'm kind of a word geek. I use that term affectionately. But discipline, the root is disciple. And so it's really being able to understand and to follow something. So if I wanted to be a disciplined marathon runner, I have to change my behavior. I have to change the things that I do. Oftentimes we think of discipline as it's punitive. And that's what it has been under a variety of federal legislation. OSPI has now said, we have to think differently. And we have a few people in the room that were able to lead a lot of the work around House Bill 1541, specifically looking at how are we creating recommendations and strategies to close, and I like to say eliminate the opportunity gap. What does that look like? One of those recommendations was around discipline practices. And so I'll start with you, Shannon, here, is just really around, as a building level leader, discipline. What does that look like? And knowing that OSPI is saying now, if we take a look on our blue sheets here, for 2018-2019, school districts are being asked to think very differently about how they define discipline, how we're keeping students in school more, how we're creating alternatives to quote-unquote suspension. We know that students cannot learn if they're not in the building. Number one. Yes, we want to focus on having culturally competent and responsive educators, but if they're not there, we know that they can't learn what they need to learn. But if we haven't created that community, as Shannon pointed out, how do I remain in community with teachers that may not see me each and every day having a fresh start? I know that this particular student had a bad day yesterday, and now you're forever. So June, you're going to be forever branded the disciplined child every day. And then that transitions on to next year. Well, you know, Shannon was in my class last year, and she was suspended 15 times. And so the minute they walk in the door, you've already branded them, and you've given them that master narrative. And so OSPI is asking school districts to do something dramatically different. What are you doing to think differently about discipline? And so Shannon, can you talk a little bit about the implications for that in your building, knowing that in the Kent School District, a unique structure is that middle school is grades 7 and 8. Across the country, middle school is grades 6, 7, and 8. And so middle school, and I appreciate having our two middle school leaders here, is a unique transition. So they're transitioning from elementary school in 6th grade, so they're in 7th grade, and then in 7th grade, they're really transitioning, ready to go to high school for 8th grade to 9th grade. So it's 2 years of complete transition. So how does one build community? How does one bring 15 different elementary schools together in one middle school in 2 years to do the work? There's bound to be some issues and concerns, and now we're looking at how do I address behavior in that space? Shannon, can you talk a little bit about that?
So I thought I could change the world. I thought, as an African-American female, being a middle school principal, I thought that students of color would just see me and everything would be perfect. I grew up in Lancaster, California, and the reason that I'm a middle school principal is because of a woman that looked like me when I was in elementary school. Her name was Diane Ellis, and I thought she was the principal, but she dressed really nice, she smelled good, she was attractive, she had a nice car, and her office always smelled good as well, and I wanted to be like her. And she's single-handedly the reason why I'm in this position. I graduated from college, she bought me a necklace, she attended my graduation. And she told me that when I was in 3rd grade that I used to look at her in awe and I was mesmerized because I wanted to be her. So I thought that that could happen for me too. I thought that I thought the kids would just say, they see me. I call them my Meeker babies. And I share this with my staff and my parents at open house, to share that baby is a term of endearment for me, because my number one job in the world is my daughter being a mom. So if my daughter calls me right now, I'm leaving. I'm going to politely excuse myself, and I'm going to Virginia. So I want all 650 of my babies to be treated the way that I would want my daughter to be treated. And I expect that to happen. Does that happen? Absolutely not. The things that I've heard shared with me by the staff that I currently work with, if someone had said the things that I've heard students say that staff members have said to them, we would have a problem, and it would never happen again. So I arm my students with this one question: to be respectful and to appropriately ask, because of the things that I hear, is there a reason why you're speaking to me like that? You're allowed to ask that question as a 12, 13, as an adult. Respect should be mutual. And no matter what you do, there's no reason that you should be made to feel a certain way. What I tell my staff is pretend that the student's parent and the superintendent is on each side of that student, and you'll never have a problem. It's a challenge. The demographics of my school and the demographics of my staff aren't reflective. This year, I'm super excited. I hired 17 staff. I was able to acquire staff of Asian descent, Hispanic, African American, Caucasian people that like kids of color. So it's definitely a shift. You can see it. Four people that are from, I don't even know, brown. They're just brown. I don't even know. It doesn't matter to me. They're just people. But for my students to see people that look like them was powerful. Doesn't mean that just because you look like someone doesn't mean that you can't be their advocate, but I think it's powerful for kids to see someone that looks like them. The challenge that I currently have is being a woman of color, and the majority of the concerns and issues that arise are from my students, with my students of color and my teachers. When I go into my in-school suspension room, 95% of the room is students of color. The students that we send home, 95% students of color. I wish there was the answer, and if someone has it, please talk to me after this, because I don't have the answer. I'm working diligently. We've incorporated positive behavior intervention system, PBIS, where we're really focusing on acknowledging the behaviors that we want students to demonstrate. We have a system in place where we give gold bars. So when students are demonstrating the core values of Meeker, we are giving out gold bars. We have an opportunity 2 times a week at lunchtime for students to cash in their tickets and to purchase something from the Pioneer store. They get 40 tickets. I buy them lunch, and they have lunch with me on the stage. And I spent a lot of money last year. I spent a lot of money. So we had to up the ante. This year, it's 40 tickets. I didn't think I was gonna spend that much money, but it's all good. But the opportunity to spend that time and space with the students and to talk to them and to hear more about them was powerful, and to do that on a stage. And we have a nice tablecloth, and we used silverware and plates, and it was really a cool experience, and I go and get it for them and call them out of class. We also have had community-based organizations, mentors come on campus, Glover Empower Mentoring, and I Daydream, Brandy Days, getting ready to start some work in January with our young girls. And really just All-Stars, After School All-Stars is a community-based organization that is an after-school program that the first hour it's a 2-hour program. The first hour is supporting academics. The second hour is enrichment, whether it's cooking, learning how to DJ, robotics, art, knitting. So it's things that are interesting to students. They are taken out into the community on field trips. They just went to, I think they went to a WNBA game or met the team. We've gone to local businesses, and they've sat in on community meetings. So there's lots of things that we're trying to implement so students make a connection with someone. They see someone or something that interests them to guide their path in a positive direction. One of the things that is hard, though, being in this position is that when my students come into my office and we have a situation, a referral, all the people that work outside of my office don't look like me. They're middle-aged white women, right? So when the students come into my office, you can tell that they're trying to see or listen to see what's going on in that office. So then that's when I turn up my Pandora, the Michael McDonald station, so they can't really hear, and I sit them down, and I said, do you understand that we're on stage? People are watching to see what's going to happen when you leave this room. If you're going to walk out and do the same thing, if there's favoritism being granted, is it because you're a student of color that things are going to happen this way? When Obama was in office, the one thing that I always said was like, do you understand that this is bigger, especially for my young ladies, do you understand that this is bigger than you? That there's a lady that looks like me in the White House. That there's 2 girls that live in the White House that look like you and my daughter. And those people are out there, they're angry about that. They're angry that I'm sitting in this seat. And when you walk out of here, I need you, if not for yourself, to do it for me and to do it for them, to do it for the bigger cause. Because, and I tell them the story about my principal when I was in elementary school. The reason that I'm in this seat, the reason why those degrees are on this wall is because I saw somebody that looked like me, that talked to me, and I wanted to be like her. So I need you to think bigger than this. I need you to carry yourself like a young lady in the hallway. That when you walk in the hallway, people are walking differently, in a different way, going outside because they're nervous, they're uncomfortable. We had a situation last year where my students took a knee during the Star Spangled Banner, and my music teacher took the day off. That was her protest. She said she refused to lead the band because she was upset that my leadership teacher allowed that to happen. I had my office manager make a statement that same day. She didn't know that I heard her. She was talking to somebody else. She said, it must be those kids that were being disrespectful during the Star Spangled Banner that took a knee. I had to count backwards to 10 before I thought, what could I say? Should I say anything? So I called her into my office and I asked her, can you repeat what you just said? And she shared, well, I didn't mean it. Nobody heard me. I said, I heard you. I said, I want to share something with you. My daughter, who's in Virginia and plays volleyball, when I went to go watch her play, she took a knee. And my dad retired from the Air Force as a retired master sergeant for 20 years and served a country when he couldn't sit in certain places on the bus and couldn't eat in certain restaurants. So it's not about being disrespectful to people in the armed services, because my daughter absolutely adores my dad, and he served this country. She told me, my daughter, when I asked her, I didn't realize that she was taking a knee. I was in the stands, and she took a knee, and she's at HBCU. Not every single person took a knee. Only 3 out of the 9, 10, 12 did. I asked her, I said, how come you did that? She said, Mom, have you ever looked at the words, the original version of the Star Spangled Banner? That song's not for us. I had to go do my research. She taught me something, but she didn't interfere with anybody else's ability to pay their respect. And so when I shared that story with that office manager, when she made that statement about it must be those kids that were being disrespectful, now you're making me think, should I, or what can I do to make sure that those students are safe in their learning environment, because there's other people that feel like you. Now they're going to be treated different. Now they're going to be frowned upon. Now they're going to be looked at. So when those things happen, it's hard. And when discipline is implemented and staff feel like students of color have lesser consequences, I always try to have my Caucasian 50-year-old white assistant principal handle the discipline so that it's not seen as it's something that I'm doing. When it comes to conversations about color and race, equity, my equity committee, my white counterpart leads that work. Because and it's unfortunate, but I'm being transparent. I don't want to be seen as I'm leading a personal agenda because I'm a woman of color. And that's the hard part about this work. How do you balance that when you have a primarily Caucasian staff and your students are students of color, and the discipline is the way that it lands? That most of my discipline occurs because of the interactions between students of color and adults. And so all I can do, and I've learned this from him, is inquiry. What is our role in a situation? When there's a situation, a referral written, what role did I play as the adult in that? Because there's underlying issues. Students come to school with lots of things, just like adults do. And so that's where I'm. It's a work in progress. I'm doing the best that I can. If there's a magic pill, if there's a book that I can read, if there's a way that I can just go and pick the people that I want, and that's what I'm trying to work on. As long as I can acquire a team that my kids feel that everywhere on that campus they're cared about, then that's when the change will happen. And it doesn't matter what color they are, as long as they're about that work and about our kids, no matter what color they are.
And so thank you for that, Shannon. So one of the things I want to go to is the regional perspective. And so, Brad, if you can just talk a little bit about what are some of the professional learning or best practices that people are starting to think about in just some of the 35 school districts that you may be aware of around addressing behavior. What is that starting to look like? Shannon mentioned PBIS. We know that we have restorative justice practices, whether that's implemented with fidelity or not, that's the conversation. But what has become top of mind as you start thinking about some of those practices that are providing the professional learning, or I like to say providing the unlearning of certain staff members to be able to address some of the requirements of this new OSPI discipline rules and policies?
So I just want to say that this has caused a lot of superintendents to really go small. The adage of sitting, getting a report, saying, hey, how do we improve that, has changed. I feel very fortunate and grateful to sit in with all of our local superintendents, and they are seeking solutions, because it's different. So here's what has happened. We've been putting the call out, and I say we, right? I remember when I got started in this work, and I was at First Creek Middle School, and started talking about restorative justice, and wanted to tell a story, and didn't think too many people wanted to hear. And then Sister Coretta, y'all might know as Thelma Jackson, but Sister Coretta came, and I say that because she came and said, we need to continue to tell this story. And so when you talk about what are we seeing, we are seeing that nationally get the attention. And here's what we need to be optimistic about. Nationally, as a teaching organization, they actually support restorative justice practices on a national organization. And they had a big, for lack of a better word, conversation. But nationally, you have to understand, back east, their teacher population is a little bit more diverse than ours, right? The conversation is different, because it's not that we're suspending those kids, they're our kids, right? That's a different conversation. And so that leads us to this part now when we start talking about classroom expulsion. So what we do, we put the cloak over it, and we say, hey, look at our outer school suspensions, how they've dropped. And what should happen, meaning if you're in class more, just by proximity, you should learn more. But what have our system done? Systems are what? They adjust, right? So what has happened, Dr. Smith mentioned earlier, no, you don't have to leave, but we're going to go put you in the sit down, be quiet closet, ISS, right? And there may be a space for ISS. The problem is the abuse of it. So if little Marion needs a timeout, that's a 15-minute. That's not 4 hours. That's the beauty, and I say this again, that's the beauty of this. This is going to cause some systems angst, meaning that from the teacher to the principal supervisor, ESD, all now have to be monitored. Where's your role in this? Your role is that school districts now are going to have to change policy. So, right, we're going to have to continue that march, right? Because we used to think it's just about boots, but it's about boots and books. We're going to have to start reading up. and understanding more and more what does it mean when we start talking about exclusion and discipline, absenteeism, right? ESSA sets the cut line at 10%. That's 18 days of school. We need to know that. We need to know what that means for our children, and we need to know what the support is, right? And don't ever settle for an answer, well, I can't teach him if he doesn't show up. Boo-boo. That does not, it doesn't go, because it's too easy. That's too easy. So when we talk about, again, I'm going to show you how all this links together. So when we talk about the McCleary decision, and we talk about schools in need, we need to be looking at how those levy dollars now go put in that quote-unquote extra nurse, right? Puts in that counselor where it's needed. Not just, oh, well, we're going to deal out 5 for everybody. It doesn't work. In terms of re-engagement educational services, and again, this discipline also links to the part of ESSA. What has changed in that is we don't label schools that way, right? Failure schools. When I was a principal, I had to send that letter home from First Creek, right? Justine was over at Truman. Wasn't it Truman? I remember Justine. Let me tell you what that does to the psyche of the community, the teachers, the environment. And you guys, we mentioned this yesterday, right? Les Brown says, no one rises to low expectations. Listen to the song we sing. Failing school, those kids, right? As opposed to, and I believe someone said it the other day, is the system failure. We have to put the onus where it is. So now when we go back and talking to discipline, be careful not to sit and talk about students' conditions. Oh, he got a broken home. Oh, his daddy ain't here. Oh, you know they walked here from Mississippi. At the end of the day, the adult in that classroom has 80% of the control of that environment. That's from the behavioral scientists. Do not allow us to say because student has, 7 toes that he can't learn. Do not accept these type of things. So when we have an opportunity like this, we need to be looking at root cause, not falling in love with data, but falling in love with what are the supports and planning to change the data. That's what's different. And that's where, the funds come from, right? So please don't talk about, oh, this school had this many fights. Time out. The question should be, what happened prior to? And if you've had 27 of those, what'd you do when it got to 7? When she talked about inquiry, let's be mindful. Now I'm about to get on soapbox. One more thing. The other day we came in here and we looked at this data around the room. I was here the other day and we talked about anger. And what do we teach our children about making decisions out of anger? Don't do it. We have to learn that anger is a secondary emotion. The first part of that is usually hurt. Deep, historical hurt. Then comes the anger, right? No different than the mama that shows up. First thing she said is, not my baby, now it's own. And we're saying, what's wrong with her? What's wrong with her? She's hurting. And the sister's response. So now it goes back, again, go back to the question, how do we turn that physical and emotional, because it's toxic, into something different? We turn it into something different by saying, hey, as Tukwila School District begins to address these discipline issues, right? What are the systems in place to support the students that are most impacted? What are these supports? Ask those questions based on the data. Don't get caught looking at the data. Let me back up. Spend less time on data, more time on supports and planning. Because the data isn't going to change unless the supports and the plans change. Does that make sense? Right? We can keep looking at the charts, but if you don't stop eating them cheeseburgers, it ain't going to change, right? So when we start talking about from a regional perspective, we are seeing superintendents really look at systems. There's going to be a change in data. We have what we call at the ESD, Dr. Smith has worked on that with colleagues prior to my arrival. It's called EWIS, E-W-I-S, Early Warner Indicator System. The reason it's there, it's almost like saying, we need to monitor this before we get to this heart attack, right? What is the diet? What does the exercise look like? And we need to be knowledge of that. So then when you go out and you have these conversations, those are questions you should be asking of your principals, of your districts, of your school board members. So again, this isn't about passive hope. This is about intentional, strategic asking. That's how we got here. Before the march, there were people in the basement. And so we have to get in the basement so that we can march intentionally, effectively, and be armed with the knowledge and skills as opposed to just being angry. But understand that hurt can turn in some deep inquiry so we can change our conditions for our students.
Thank you for that, Brad. And so one of the things, I'm mindful of our time, and I also want to focus on going to the macro. We started our time today focusing on micro concerns, and you've heard the topics interweaving throughout. And so I want to spend the last part of our time before turning it over to any questions that you may have for our panelists, talking about federal legislation. And so ESSA, and so the Every Student Succeeds Act. So a reauthorization of, most of us may be familiar with No Child Left Behind. And so the document that you have that provides a few resources is our yellow packet here that just gives you a general overview of ESSA. And then the following pages are frequently asked questions specifically in Washington State. And so one of the components around the Every Student Succeeds Act, I like to say that policy, practice, all of that, or board decisions, paper accepts anything. And so we now have this new policy. We now have this new federal legislation. But then, as you heard all of our colleagues on the panel talk about, the work becomes the implementation. The work becomes, what are we choosing to do, or what are we choosing not to do to move the work forward? ESSA really shifts the conversation, as Brad talked about. It starts to say, we're no longer calling, if you remember, we disaggregated data under No Child Left Behind, and they were called subgroups. Once again, I bring back my etymology background. Subgroups already says that it's inferior. We've changed the language to student groups. That's number one. Secondly, we've moved away from identifying failing schools. Your school is failing. In North Philadelphia, I had the pleasure and privilege, and shout out to North Philly, 22nd and Norris. Whew. Ooh, it takes me back. Lord, I need an amen with that one. And so working at at the time, No Child Left Behind called it one of the most persistently dangerous schools in the United States of America. That's what the No Child Left Behind label was. Now we're looking at, under ESSA, we're looking at identifying schools for support. You are identified for comprehensive supports. You're identified for targeted supports because there are certain student groups that are not performing at the level where we know they can perform. And as Brad pointed out, the onus of responsibility is now being placed on the system to say, what are we doing with our funding? What are we doing with professional learning? What are we doing across the board to make sure that a Meeker Middle School gets what it needs based on the student groups, based on what we know to be true? And so what I would like to do is just to start with Darice. If you could talk a little bit about leading a building, knowing that you may or may not be identified by the state as receiving comprehensive or targeted supports, but how has that shifted the conversation in your building at the district level? And what do you see as being some of those implications around moving away from that punitive approach to more of a support approach, and what's missing in between, knowing that this is the very first year that we're thinking about this?
So my school is considered targeted, as all of the middle schools in Kent, I believe, are for our different student group areas. And I think that the implication for me is this is all new for us. And so trying to make the shift in our mind from No Child Left Behind to ESSA is an interesting one. Teachers know No Child Left Behind. And so as a leader, for me, trying to understand ESSA and put it in front of my staff has been a challenge because I'm not sure how much I understand it to be able to explain it to the staff, other than to say we have these targeted areas, and our areas are special ed, African American students, and ELL. And my staff's looking at me like, tell us something we didn't already know. I'm like, okay, great, now I have to work with that. Because again, the issue still is teachers feeling like it is not their responsibility, or not that it wasn't their fault. that, well, it's the same group every year. We know that. We know it's our African American students. What are we supposed to do about it? Teach. You're the teacher. But as the leader, I have to take the responsibility in how do I help reframe my staff's mind, and what type of intervention. We talk about intervention for students, we need intervention for our staffs, for our teachers. And so what type of interventions do I have to help put in place to have my teachers understand that it's not just about the whole school, but these 3 targeted areas and these student groups are really where we need to focus. So what does that look like in the classroom? What does that look like around the building? How do you change your instruction? Because your instruction needs to change. How do you change it so that our students are receptive to what it is you are trying to teach them? As Dr. Smith said earlier, we have 2 years in Kent to make, in the middle school, to make a difference. And as I told my teachers, you're the constant. We, as a staff, on average, you have been here 15 years or more. So how many cohorts of kids have gone through? They're gone. You're still here. And our test results look the same, if or worse. And so that's not a student issue. That's an adult issue. And what I'm feeling like in understanding ESSA is that ESSA is going to grant us a little more support, and teachers need something that makes it feel better for them. No Child Left Behind felt punitive, felt like we couldn't dig ourselves out of it because every year you have to set this goal, and every year you have to meet this goal. Under ESSA, it feels like we have a little bit more time, understanding that it takes time. So under ESSA, if I have 3 years to make a difference, I can make a long-term plan that actually feels like I'm going to be able to support students. It feels like I'm going to have some additional funding in order to help teachers help students. So I'm not scared right now. It's only just, ESSA's just being implemented, but I feel like it also, the responsibility of having parents on board, so teachers can't hide in their classrooms or hide in the building. The parents have to have a say in it, and that makes teachers think differently when they know that a parent is looking over their shoulder, because oftentimes they feel like, well, I'm gonna be okay because that parent will never come in the building, or I can never get a hold of them, or I can just hide behind this email. But when I, as a leader, have to make an intentional move to bring parents into the building, into a conversation, and you need to sit there, good, bad, or indifferent, and listen and learn, that's also going to, I think, help teachers help students.
And so just hearing from our other principal on the panel, along with ESSA, we actually have additional funding that's provided for certain schools that are identified for targeted supports. And so Shannon, can you talk specifically about what you're thinking about in this very first year of how you're going to be able to use these additional funds that are being provided by OSPI to really target some of those needs, specifically in those student groups that may be still underperforming in your building?
Well, I was asked by my supervisor.
Who is your supervisor?
Dr.
Great,
Smith.
thank you. I know, we love you. Yeah, great, thanks. Okay, good.
Asked by my supervisor, because we are implementing this year intervention for our 7th grade cohort of students for math and English, my boss asked me, well, what about the 8th graders? And I didn't have an answer. I teared up a little bit because I didn't have an answer. And what Principal Johnson just said, that she had to take something away to give something else. I'm doing a disservice to those 8th graders, so we don't care about the 8th graders? What if an 8th grader was my student? I didn't have the answer. I'm doing what I can with the situation and the resources that I have. So we're going to focus on the 7th graders, and hopefully we'll be able to do the same thing with my allocation. I'll be able to be creative for next year. But using my instructional coach to support teachers around increasing the level of rigor and academic talk in the classroom, school-wide strategies, best practices, and it becoming a culture and an understanding that we are meeting the needs of all students, making things accessible for students, Simple things like greeting students at the door. You see those things on YouTube where teachers are engaged in giving high fives and have handshakes. If I could have 12 of those teachers in my school, that would be a game changer, because my students, from the time they walk into my building, would feel it and would want to be there. When I go into classrooms, and I'm just being transparent, when I go into classrooms and it's stand and deliver, and teachers are standing and talking at students, and students are trying to figure out how to get out and go to the bathroom or how to meet their friends in the hallway because they're not engaged because they're talking about dead white men and it's a white person standing in front of them, I don't know either. When I have my younger teachers who are a diverse staff that are doing four-corner activities, getting students up and active and engaged and talking, and may have some music playing in the background when they're doing independent work because they're on task, the approach is different and the students are bought in differently. But when you have teachers who've been there 30 years, and this is the way that I've always done it, this is the way that I'm going to continue to do it, and the students have to figure out how to get what it is that I'm giving them to pass the state assessment, that's a work in progress. That's a challenge. To change the mindset of the adult is definitely a challenge. But the hope is that they feel uncomfortable because of the newness and the fresh and the ability to connect with students for those that come in and are doing that. And when you ask students who's your favorite teacher and they're saying why, and I always ask why, and they're able to articulate that, and it's not because they're cool, they're able to say because I'm learning this concept, and they give me specific feedback on my tests that it's not because they have an A, it's because they make math fun, or we do a lot of engaging activities, it's fun, we're up and moving, and to be able to articulate that. One of the things that we're incorporating this year is surveys at the end of the semester to give teachers feedback on what students are thinking and feeling about their class. And we ask our customers when we go into restaurants or go into the doctor's office, so how was your visit? But we never ask our students. And we think what we're doing is working, and obviously it's not. And so teachers are not excited about that because they're not, the feedback that we're going to get is it's going to be real, and it's geared towards you. We normally have a survey for the whole school. So it's like, does your teacher, but we're talking about 6 different people. So when it says, does your teacher, are you talking about your English teacher? Are you talking about your math teacher? No, this is you. This is your survey. This is for your class. And so what do we do with that information when we come back together, when students are saying, I don't get what you're saying. I don't understand when we give assessments, I don't get the information, because I hear students say all the time, what was on the assessment wasn't what we learned. And so I think it's important for us to really reflect on, are we meeting the needs of students? Are they really grasping the concepts and the skills that we're trying to share with them? The intervention piece, I personally handpicked the facilitators of that work. And if I could handpick every teacher, I think that would be a benefit. And how do you close that gap? Because now, even for my in-school suspension room, I have a lady, Caucasian, older lady, but she loves our kids. Now my kids want to go to ISS, though. They want to go to ISS because she loves our babies. And so now I have the teachers mad because there's a lady that cares about them. But what if you cared about them? They'd want to be in your class too. They'd want to be in your class too. They're saying, I want to go to Miss such and such. I'm like, shh, be quiet. You can't say that. You cannot say that because everybody's watching. We are on stage. I get it. I brought her on my team for a reason. She cares about you guys. I brought her on my team. I have a mentorship class now with the outside mentorship company, Glover Empower Mentoring. There's a full-time person, 6th period. It's a what's the word I'm looking for? It's a mentorship course. There's a curriculum written. 25 students are in that class, and I have it co-taught with a teacher. So I'm hoping that this is a pilot to see that the work, when students connect with a person that they know cares about them, to see what they can get from that information and transfer it into the classroom and be successful no matter who's in front of them. Because right now, what I say to my students is, I know if I was your teacher, we wouldn't have this problem. I know that if I handpick certain teachers, you won't have a problem. But the issue is that I don't have that many teachers to go around. I have too many students that would benefit from that situation. But I also know that when they leave me from middle school to go to high school, that's not going to happen. And I need to arm you with how to be successful and navigate the school system, no matter who's standing in front of you, no matter who your principal is. And that's the question of the year.
And so one of the things we want to create an opportunity for you to think about, or if you have any questions, just honoring our time, but I'm also mindful that time is a social construct, so we can be here all day engaging in this great conversation. But are there any questions that you may have for our panelists initially?
I'm a trustee at Highline College, and I came from private enterprise into education, so I don't have the familiarity with education, which has been a blessing, because then the questions I ask aren't because I've come through that, and so as a teacher or a principal. But one of the things that confounds me, and I would love to hear more from you all, why there's not more peer coaching. So if we have young teachers, or they happen to be young, but they are using practices that are engaging students of color, then how can we set up more internal within the school peer coaching and create an incentive for teachers? Because if they're being evaluated by students, it's part of their professional development, possibly linking it, that there isn't more peer coaching. And so that's something I'd like to hear more about. And even at Highline College, when they had they set up an opportunity for trustees to go to classrooms, I went to 2 different classrooms. They were adjacent to each other. And in one classroom, the teacher was doing the sage from the stage approach, and all the students in the back of the room were on their cell phones. Then I walked next door, and the teacher was using kinesthetic approaches with artifacts they could touch, and there was nobody on their cell phone. Everybody was leaning forward, everybody was engaged, and they had the same percentage of students of color in both classrooms, and they had 2 white males, and one teacher was using engaging practices, and the other was doing the good old traditional. I'm like, how come they're not in a peer coaching situation or mentoring to exchange that information? So if you all could just share more about that, that to me seems like I won't say a no-brainer, because I know execution can be different from the concept, but that just seems to be something that there's more room for that to happen.
There's definitely more room for that to happen. I think education is so interesting and unique, because in every other profession or job, people have coaches. An athlete has coaches. A musician has coaches. Business people have coaches. But educators feel like once I got my 4-year, 6-year, 8-year degree, I don't need a coach. I got it. I can do it. And so it is very hard to get teachers to open their classroom doors to their colleagues. Nervousness. Even the teachers who are doing best practice feel that if a colleague comes in, it's like, oh, they're the gold. They want me to go see the golden teacher. So they turn into middle schoolers. And, I'm going to be popular, and I'm the bad teacher. And so we have been, at least the past couple years, introducing not just learning walks, but the concept of, in education, they call it instructional rounds, like doctors do rounds. So going into the classroom, but with a particular focus, not on what the teacher is doing, but what the student is learning. And so asking the question if the learning would be more effective for so-and-so, and it's a group of teachers that come into the room, just for like 10 minutes, take some notes, and then they go back and they confer together. And then you put in a relief teacher to bring the teacher that was in the classroom out to talk to them about what they saw students doing. And again, it's about what the students were doing. So it takes some of the onus off the teacher feeling like they have to be putting on a show as soon as an adult comes in the room. And a lot of this work is around making the teachers feel good so that so they can be open and receptive to it. And I think the other piece of it is there's the cost of it. So if you're going to have a peer coach, offering getting subs to sub teachers in and out, so that if I can't afford in my building a person to just be a coach, I have to create a model where a culture where teachers want to be able to go into each other's classrooms. And so that means that I have to take out of my building money to pay for subs so that I could have a team of teachers go look at another classroom, but somebody's got to watch the kids that are still left while the teachers are walking around. So there's still a cost that's incurred at the building level. Is it worth it? Absolutely. It's still taking me 2 years and we're still not there. I still have the same group of teachers like, yeah, come in my room. Yes, I want to go see so-and-so teach. And others, door is closed. Like, nope, no thank you, don't want. And no matter how many feel-good videos you show, how much PD, in the end, when we do the sign-up sheet, miraculously, it just passes them by. And so even if you try to take the approach of I'm going to mandate that you participate in this, then they're not in it. They're really not in it. And so it's this, I guess, ebb and flow of it's mind games too. They're kids. Teachers are a lot of the more negative ones are big kids. And it's really about fear. And so how do I get them to not be fearful about what they're doing? They could be doing some magnificent things and we would never know it. So there's money, there's cost, but there's also attitude about it and being open and receptive to we have to think about things differently. And again, it's unfortunate that in education, the root of all professions, that this is how we show kids, well, don't worry, I don't need a coach, don't worry. I'm an adult here, I don't need a coach. But go ahead, because you need tutoring after school, and I can help you with that, but I don't need any help.
Black people should be treated well.
There we go. So we'll say that again. So Black people should be treated well.
Hey, Dr. Smith, I just
Yes.
want to add to the young lady's question.
There we go.
One of the other things that more schools are trying to do is a thing called co-teaching. It's to be more effective. Another large group of students that is affected via ESSA is, we call it SWD, Students with Disability. And what does that mean? What does that transpire for us? Well, historically, people of color are overrepresented in this category. And so I want us to be mindful of that. And so when we start talking again, going back to money, levy dollars, what does the support look like for that? And then how do we put things in place? Where do you go to get that professional development? When I was in Kent, I sent them to Dr. Smith and Neekum Pond. They have to go and learn restorative practice. They have to go and learn cultural responsive teaching. So it is available. It is often not that expensive. It is about the will and desire to go. It's about dispensing information. It's about also supporting systems. At the ESD, I think Eileen, is that her name, has started a group. It's called Teachers of Color. I think it's important that when we oftentimes bring people from other places into an organization, loneliness is real. Culture adjustment is real. And so if you know teachers that are out there that are looking for somewhere to belong, looking somewhere to navigate, looking for strength and support, please let me know and we can get them connected with this support and services, again, so they can feel good about where they are, know where their resources are, and also get the support to still be those great practicing adults we know they can be.
Well, thank you. We had three particular topical points that kind of oversaw the panel and the discussions that we embarked upon. And we started out with the McCleary decision, the name given to a lawsuit brought forth on this state due to the issue of funding. But I often try to remind people, because McCleary is tied to this state's paramount duty in the Constitution, one of the few states in the nation with such a strong constitutional mandate. And most of the time when I see the paramount duty, it stops halfway. And I want to connect this to the whole discussion we're having about who's not succeeding in our system. The paramount duty says that the state is mandated to provide an ample and uniform education for all children. And it usually stops right there, and then we get into the funding piece of it. But there's a comma, and the rest of it says, education for all children residing within its borders without distinction or preference on account of race, color, caste, or sex. So this state is failing to provide an ample education for children of color and these other disenfranchised. So McCleary was the name for the lawsuit challenging the funding. And I'm wondering, as we move forward in that third bullet of yours, what's going to be the name of the lawsuit when we sue the state for lack of ample education for our children?
It's going to be called the Miss Coretta. I said it's going to be called the Miss Coretta.
And so one of the things we wanted to end our time with is simply this. We know that paper accepts anything, going back to policies, practices, and procedures, and it really is about how are we moving this work forward? How are we remaining in partnership and community with our leaders to push the conversation? Conversation is the first step, but then we know that action, meaning what are we doing or not doing to move the work forward, that will dramatically impact our Black and African American students. And so as we transition to table time and or lunch, this is a call to action for all of us that are in this room. I began our panel session by saying we are here because we care about and we are concerned about achievement of Black and African American students. We want to make sure that the system, which is filled with people and their beliefs, their will, their skill, their capacity, they have the professional learning. They have what is critical and essential to move the needle to support all of our students. And so as you transition to lunch and reflect on our time together, I just leave you with an opportunity to reflect and declare. Not just simply saying I'm reflecting, but I'm declaring action on something. So I will do this. What is that for you? Your first priority to move some of this information forward. Maybe it is, wow, I need to really understand, as one of our panelists mentioned, what does all of this mean? Like, what are the implications? Who are the leaders that are in my school district or in my capacity that I could possibly engage in conversations with to let them know, I actually know a little something about this now, so I have questions for you. What are you doing? What are those strategies in the building? And or lastly, I will be held accountable for. As you move forward today, the purpose of the panel was twofold: to create opportunities to hear different perspectives, but also it's not about information for information's sake. It is to do something with it to impact our Black and brown students, period. And so I offer that. I want to thank once again our esteemed panel, if we can give them a round of applause. Knowing that you have a partner in this work, and I like to always end by going back to the statement that talked about being on that airplane. But it really is about how are we going to work together to disrupt and dismantle those inequitable policies, practices, and procedures that continue to have our students not performing at the levels that we know they can. We are nation builders. We focus on the brilliance of our students, and we're excited that we have new legislation and priorities that will be able to galvanize us together. And so remain in contact with us, remain in contact with those in your community, because we can continue to push the conversation and then to push the action. So thank you for your time, and thank you for everything that you do on behalf of Black and African American students.